attending today's session. Very, very happy to be with you. I'm happy particularly because this gives me the opportunity to talk about an aspect of life that we're all going through, and that is the prospect of coming out of this horrible period, and how do we get back to some semblance of normalcy, some semblance of regularity and growth. Let's getting back to growth. We are going to answer a question that comes up quite a bit, frankly, and that question is very simply, Ken, who is this for? Who is the actual target audience for this? And it's one of the rare times in my career where I have actually been able to say, well, if you are a member, at least a member of the million upon million strong labor force involved in information technology, then this is for you. If you have years ahead of you in the IT organization, IT industry, this is for you. And I will go through reasons for why we're reaching that conclusion as we go through this discussion. So with that, let's turn our attention to this post-pandemic period that we're about to enter into, and not a minute too soon, obviously. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about the current state of the world very, very quickly. We are going to talk about concepts that will be extremely important for this discussion, and how to return to growth, how do we return to some degree of normalcy. And then at the end of the day, clear, precise information on how do we start a digital transformation project if you have not yet started one prior to the pandemic. With that, let's just give you a heads up here. When I get to the end of part 2, by that point, you might be hating me, because it is a very, very, we're going to give you a lot of information here. So hopefully, it won't be too bad. But with that, let's begin with a situation we already know. Now, I would draw your attention to the current conditions from the World Health Organization. And those conditions are as of last week. And they have been updated as of this morning, so watch the numbers very carefully, please. And it just is on this inexorable drive going north. So let me go back again. And here we go. Tragic beyond the ability to explain. And with regard to the health impact of titanic proportions, it's also had an amazing impact, a very, very harmful impact on the economy worldwide. Now, it was only 10 years ago when we were in our last recession. And back then it was called the Great Recession, because it was the worst period in the economy since the Depression of the 1920s and 30s. Well, guess what? This has surpassed the Great Recession. The economic harm, the economic impact has just been devastating by so many different measures. So with that, it provides a backdrop on our discussion for today. So we all know what we've all gone through. We know what we've all endured, and perhaps we know what we have to get back to. So where do we go from here? And there will be an opportunity before we supposedly get back to normal, if there's any such thing possible, by simply reflecting what has just transpired for the last year and a half. And it will be a reflective moment for many people, not least of which is because of the tragic impact that COVID has had on hundreds of millions of people, and here are millions who are no longer with us. But with that, where do we go from here? Where were we? What, all these questions that arise. And when we say where were we, what were we doing prior to this disruption? Now, anybody who's ever gone through a catastrophe, anybody who's gone through natural occurrence, tornadoes, hurricanes, et cetera, one of the first things one does is, before we get any plans together to determine how to get back to normal, we first do an assessment of what's gone on. We just went through the health impact. We went through the worldwide economic impact. But I will tell you, after looking at these conditions and after studying these conditions for many, many months since the start of the pandemic, there is something different. And this is really, really important. Think about your ancestors. Think about your ancestors and your ancestor of 10 generations ago. When you look at that, was the person in 10 generations ago occupied engaged in an occupation that was really that much different than the 9th generation ago and the 8th generation ago? Over time, things tend to be static, but then there is a moment when things change, and there is an enormous change that's taking place here, slowly but surely. So this period is different. And why do we make that claim? Because this is the first time in history we are coming out of a recession. There have been many in the past. And we're coming out of a pandemic. There have been many in the past. But this is the very first time we're coming out of a recession and a pandemic. And waiting for us is a new economy predicated upon the notion of a digital economy. And I'm going to explain why that is not rubbish or BS at all. So yours truly is second to no one in looking for that hype, that nonsense. That I actually am the president of the AADBS. It is the Analyst Against Digital BS. And Lord knows we need to take members of this industry that we all work in and bring them to the International Court of Justice and lay charges upon them for crimes against our sanity because of this digital nonsense that we've all been through. But there is actually the essence of very important details that need to be examined in the digital discussion. It's just a shame that it's been populated by so much nonsense around the core message here of a digital economy. And here are just a couple of reasons we conclude that there is an enormous amount of work taking place at national and international levels, redoing the way we measure economies, reclassifying what we do with intangible assets now that we are predominantly in a worldwide services-based economy. We are finding book after journal after report onward and never ending on how to address the changes that are being brought about by a digital economy. They do not know at the national and international level how to measure a digital economy. Here are examples of trying to do that, bringing in new notions and new data. It is recognizing that we are undergoing a change. Just an example of where are we with regard to some one category of retail sales. If you go back not too long ago, 10, 15 years ago, that is the kind of change that I'm talking about from your 10th ancestor back to 9 to 8. At some point they change. 20 years ago, this was an insignificant, if countable number, but now we're seeing United States 14% of online retail sales versus China at 25%, and all other countries are catching up. But what is the digital economy? Very good. Just like what is digital business? What is digital transformation? All these things, it is astonishing the simple number of academic papers on this topic that will begin with. It should be noted that there is no internationally, universally accepted definition for a digital economy. Well, that's the kind of certainty I'm looking for. Nonetheless, it is a work in progress on coming up with a reasonable definition of a digital economy, but it begins with our own Department of Commerce, with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and inviting these notions to be central to it. When you look at the OECD, they have taken a little step further, trying to come up with that definition. It is a moving target, but one thing, unlike other things pertaining to digital, it is not a BS target. It is something that is genuinely happening, and I'm going to go through that with you this afternoon. When we think of those things that are engaged in an economy, you have advertising taking place. You have spending taking place for e-buying, and I'll explain that. Global retail sales, wholesale trade, how people pay, just these simple underpinnings of an economy that are now being transferred and transformed into digital formats. Let's take a look at this. When we take a look at all the advertising that is spent on Earth, that number is just under $750 billion per year. Just in the last couple of few years, that number has gone beyond the 50% mark. More than 50% of all advertising now is quote unquote via digital means. Obviously, we have seen the demise of newspapers, magazines, even outdoor advertising. Different categories are succumbing to the digital advertising trend, but that's $750 billion. When we take a look at all people on Earth, this is the number of people who are not only online, of which there are many more than 1.42 billion, but these are people who are buying. They are actually engaged in commerce. Beyond that, we buy a lot of stuff as just human beings. Here we're talking about $25 trillion in 1 year. Business to business, huge, even larger, 48, almost $49 trillion. And then how do you pay for stuff? And we'll go through some of the research that's taking place there. Each one of these categories is transforming from the way things used to be done back 10 generations ago, 5 generations ago, even 2 generations ago, and undergoing one of the most massive transformations that anyone has ever seen on this planet. Now, when we take a look at this from this perspective, we take a look at, all right, let's talk about digital transformation. We're coming out of recession. We're brushing ourselves off. We've done our assessment of where we are and where are we heading. We are heading into this new realm of digital economy. Where do we start? Just a reminder. So let's take a look at some concepts before we go through the particulars of how to start a transformation project. So we're going to talk about 3 phases of business. This is a topic that is, and this is really central and vital to the overall understanding. This is a process-oriented, a task-oriented, and occupations-oriented discussion that we'll be having. We'll talk about a particular goal, and then we will walk you through the steps, the 10 steps that we feel are crucial to a digital transformation. So let's begin with the 3 phases of business, and we all know this intuitively. We're talking about over time, from the time you say, gee, I think I want to buy blah, blah, blah. All right. As time goes by, you are going through different phases. Well, so are companies that are selling things to you, companies that are selling to other companies that are making the final product for you. There are business phases, and for lack of a more elegant lettered way of explaining it, there is activity that takes place prior to making a sale of something, a good, a service, doesn't matter. These are people in your own companies that you know. They are marketing people. They are product development people. They are the advertising, the sales people. Who do we sell to? How do we sell it? When do we sell it? There's the moment that you actually buy something as a consumer, transfer from the seller to you. And then there are people in your company who deal with the fact that your company has sold stuff. This is where IT has spent most of the last 60 years in this third category, this third phase of business. And this is where accounts receivable, accounts payable, supply chains, logistics, HR, you can go on and on. By far, this is the area where most IT has been spent. When you take a look at it across those three phases of business, we have activities, we have applications, we have occupations. And as I said, where have we spent most of the last 60 years of information technology as a formally recognized industry? Was very, very clear. I'm being generous with regard to highlighting a sale occurs phase, but clearly it's the quote unquote back office where all that money, a predominant amount, overwhelming amount of money has been spent. And here is where the new target will be. It is the area where people are trying to devise what should we sell, as I said, to whom should we sell, when should we sell it, how do we sell it? And I will just give you one example of that. That yesterday it was reported, beg your pardon, a week from yesterday, I think it was, that Walmart bought a company, Zeekit, for an undisclosed amount. And this is a firm that identifies ways to, you load your photographs into this application, and it will put you through a virtual fitting room, if you will. So you will be able to see what you look like in the garment or whatever you're trying to buy. Others have taken a crack at this. This one really seems very, very promising, but it is precisely the example that I'm talking about of seeing more and more technology being devoted and directed towards the phase of business where we really haven't seen it before. And if you doubt me, have a discussion with people in your marketing departments, in your sales departments, your product development departments. In your career, ask them, how much has information technology helped you identify and close brand new revenue? And that is going to be one very, very quick discussion. It's been virtually silent. And we're seeing more and more activity in this realm. Is where we're starting to see more and more intelligent automation under the banner of AI. This is where we're seeing a lot of new detail and activity taking place. So with the nature of processes, again, I said this is a concept that we really have to find, get our heads around. It is central to this discussion about digital economy, processes, tasks, occupations. And with that, in the United States, and we can do this for any country, there are around 160 million people employed. It's a little bit less than that because of the pandemic, but before we went into this, about 160 million people employed. However, 160 million people, according to the Department of Labor here in the States, has identified just under 1,000 individual discrete occupations. We have many carpenters, we have many physicians, we have many lawyers, we have perhaps too many, never mind. And that 160 million boils down into about 1,000 discrete, separate from each other occupations. What scientists have done, and I note in particular David Otter of AUTOR of MIT, has identified the nature of tasks and the nature of occupations. And he's categorized them into four. In this particular case, I'm going to walk you through 5 of them that other scientists have looked at. The first category is called, of occupations, of tasks, is called routine cognitive. It is the same thing largely over and over and over again. There may be need for adjustment during the particular workday, but it's pretty much the same story every day. There's routine manual. Here it is undoubtedly the same task being done every day. And think of that in terms of assembly line workers. There is non-routine manual. We'll come back to that. And then there is non-routine cognitive. And in that, we break it up into two categories: non-routine analytic, non-routine interactive. Here, you need your brain every day. No 2 days are the same. You need to adjust, you need to accommodate whatever new comes along, et cetera, et cetera. And here is where most IT solutions in the last 50 to 60 years have been directed. That which is done over and over and over again, follows strict rules, and is predictable. And where we are seeing more and more information and more effort and more research taking place, it's in the realm of what you and I do for a living, and others, the non-routine cognitive workers. In this particular case, stay tuned and keep an eye on something called intelligent automation, because it is finally making inroads into this last realm of workers and tasks. I have non-routine manual over on the left side. And a great example, you need your brain every day, but it's pretty much the same thing over and over, and conditions change all the time. Think of waiters and waitresses, for example, police officers, and so on. There's just not too many companies making physical robots walking the streets and taking your orders at dinner. That is something we haven't really seen many inroads so far. But here's where the activity is taking place, and here is where you will see ongoing back to automating and bringing new capabilities to business. This is part of the discussion about where do we go from after the pandemic? Where are we heading? Where were we? Well, we were in the midst of updating and improving these processes and procedures and tasks and occupations. And this is where we will continue to head. What's the goal of all that? Well, transforming in a digital format that will deliver the greatest financial benefit. We are not doing this for fun. The world is not doing this because it's a kind of cool thing to do. It is very definitely heading towards greater productivity, increased revenues, and that is just the way that we see this unfolding and continuing to unfold. And as I indicated, going through all those concepts and such, they're just crucial. They just are crucial. And I would really encourage you to be heedful of and monitor some of the research that's taking place on tasks, on occupations, on processes and procedures. It is the heart and soul of this discussion going forward of what constitutes a digital economy. So with part 3, how do we start a conversation? How do we start this whole digital transformation effort, especially if one has not done so before? And we are already getting a real tidal wave of interest as we start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Clients are calling up, okay, I want to get back to that digital transformation stuff we were doing prior to the pandemic, or I want to undertake it. I know I really should have been undergoing it prior to pandemic. We got stalled, and now it's time to return and return to our efforts. So let's talk about the preparation. How do we get there? How do we undertake this process of digitally transforming an entire economy? So just a clearer look at what we'll be talking about. Step number 1, we recommend you recognize and identify the 3 phases of business that take place in your organizations, in your companies. You know the people, you know the departments, you have a basic understanding of this already within your own specific companies. Who is in marketing? Who is in advertising? Who is in product development? Anything that is taking place prior to selling something, whether it's a product or a service, We do know that in the United States, it's somewhere around a $21 trillion economy. There's a lot of stuff to talk about there. There is the moment a sale takes place. You know the people, they're in sales support, et cetera, et cetera. Then you talk about post-sale activities. Accounts receivable people, accounts payable people, HR department, and on and on and on. It's where most of the people are in most companies. It's where most of the occupations reside. It is well known to all of you. Second step, go to the general ledger. Do not rely upon someone's understanding. Oh, I think it's go to the general ledger and ascertain your company's top 10 revenue generating products or services right out of the general ledger, or the top 10 business expenses. Number 3, list all the occupations that are engaged in the top 10 revenue or top 10 business expense categories. It's a discrete number. Classify those occupations based upon the nature of the tasks that the people perform. Are they routine cognitive, routine manual, non-routine cognitive, non-routine manual? There's an abundant amount of research that helps one identify, and it's pretty easy to do. You intuitively know it anyway. The nature of occupations and tasks that are performed in your organization. Choose a business phase. Remember those 3 phases. Choose a product or a service that's either revenue or expense related. Select one occupation. So you're choosing one phase of business before the sale after the sale. You're choosing one product or one expense category, and you're picking one occupation from whatever you chose in step 6. You're going to confirm the nature of that occupation. Is it predominantly routine cognitive, routine manual, et cetera, et cetera? Number 9, you're going to designate whether that activity is predominantly conducted within the enterprise or between your enterprise and another enterprise, like B2B type activity. And then number 10, you're going to do an analysis. Is this worthy of being digitally transformed from its current method of doing tasks, occupations, etc.? Does it make sense? So let's take a run at this. What will it cost to do this? What are the benefits? What are the downfalls? And you do it process by process and until you've reached those 20 categories. And the reason I'm saying the 20 categories, the top 10 revenue and the top 10 expense, is because if you did the 92nd most important revenue or expense topic in your company and you did it perfectly, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't show up on the radar. It would not move the needle on your income statement. We say go to the top 10 revenue and top 10 expense categories because if there's going to be an improvement, it will show up because of its sheer size. It will show up on the income statement. And let me give you a little tip. Let me give you a little spoiler alert. If you are like most companies, the pre-sale activities, occupations, tasks that take place in that phase of business are still to this day among the most highly manual work, occupations, tasks, and procedures that exist today. You're probably going to find some rich opportunities to significantly improve the business by choosing that realm, but the choice is yours. So there's the summary. All the steps, the generic up top, the specific down below, and thus your journey begins. Now, this is a heck of a task to be invited to present, and that is how do we do a digital transformation? But there is a lot of lot of detail and research behind these steps, and we are ready, willing, and able to help anybody engaged in that process and about to undertake that journey. I'm going to pause right now and invite questions, but I do want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully we'll see that virus go away. I'm going to put a postscript here. All right, and this data, this research findings are still being scrubbed, have not yet published it, but I'm going to keep this here while we invite Q&A, perhaps steering the conversation, steering the questions in a direction that will be most helpful for you. With that, Jason, I turn it back to you, my friend.
Thank you very, very much, sir. And we do obviously have some questions coming in, so thank you first and foremost for taking the time to deliver that. And data. We all know the audience love data. So folks, yeah, just to reiterate as well, anyone interested in having a chat with the Infotech team, let us know here at Sync as well, and we can help you out with that. But without further ado, let's get into some of this Q&A as people are taking the time to submit some questions. So first one, actually, Kenneth, it kind of came early on in the session, but I wanted to save it until the end. Can you define what is digital transformation in your view, as it seems to be a bit of an overused term and means different things to different audiences?
We're getting closer and closer to what seems to be a reasonable definition. Can I give you one? As long as we recognize work in progress by international organizations, but by nations themselves that are changing their plans, but we are simply talking about the migration away from reliance upon analog ways of doing things to things that to ways that computers will understand. As one researcher said, when we look at all the individual activities that are taking place, we are heading towards a day when we will have virtually all human activities on one channel, namely the internet. So migration away from reliance upon analog methods of doing things towards a method that computers will understand.
Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Another one, what are your expectations about who should lead digital transformation efforts? Some think it is technology leaders, and I agree to some extent, but buy-in from the business community is critical, especially as their processes are the ones being transformed via the technology being used.
We have not arrived at a research conclusion. Therefore, one enters the realm of, well, what's your opinion? We're all about the research findings at Infotech, but you will not suffer from an absence of people providing their opinion. What you do not see on this chart, and specifically in anticipation of a question like this, I brought you to this chart. What you don't see on here is the transformation of the human factor. You don't see the transformation that had to take place with cultures within a company. Now, consider General Motors. General Motors has said that they will provide all electric vehicles starting in 2035. Think about one of the oldest companies around and the cultural transformation that's taking place simultaneously with the technical transformation that's taking place. So when a question comes about who is best to lead it, I cannot reasonably, as a researcher, conclude that it is solely the realm of those technologists that will ultimately bring this about on the technical side. I can't, because there is a large, yet to be defined and yet to be quantified human factor, and it just simply is incongruent with the skills that my technology colleagues have to also ably guide their companies through the human factors of how that will change. The different suppliers that GM will use, the different ways of working with each other within GM, outside GM, is just one example. I cannot conclude at this particular point, this is the best and logical realm of the technologist. It's far, far more complicated than that.
That's fair enough. Obviously, you guys, as you said, it's all based on the research and the data presented. The question here comes in as it relates to implementation, what is your opinion on tactics to implement? For example, revenue generating departments first, highest expense first. Have you seen any examples where research might kind of lend towards focusing in one area above another first?
It's the reason, no is the answer, I have not, but it is the reason why I have indicated the top 10 revenue and top 10 expense. First of all, let's make a big impact and let's make a big impact early. Number two, whether it's the expense side, whether it's the revenue side, it will show up on the income statement. You get your foot in the door as a proof of concept, and then onward and upward, the board will support whatever you're going to do, the CEO, the senior executives, etc. Where to start is, again, back to who's leading the brigade. People tend to focus on that which they already know. If it is the traditional technologists, they're more apt to look at the back office, assuming that they're not going to automate and digitize the cafeteria menu. Whereas someone who's like a CDO, why CDOs have largely been hired, they tend to head towards the revenue side. And it's as if there are two realms that are waiting to unfold: a CIO for the back office, a CIO for the front office, because no one seems smart enough to do it all in one person. So my thinking is, if you really want to make the biggest point, head for the revenue.
Great, thank you very much. Some great business oriented examples, but as a county government, or maybe Guernsey government, things are different in terms of marketing, sales, and typical commercial activities. So can you suggest how to apply these corporate examples to a public sector organization?
Jason was pretty cruel in only allowing me 40 minutes, so I do offer my apology for that. There is a public sector version of this, which is not too distant from what I'm talking about here, because at the end of the day, we're talking about, we live in a world where there's almost $3 trillion of tax receipts from all nations, all municipalities, et cetera. So your municipality has has revenue, if you will, just like commercial sector does. But there are differences that are worthy of being highlighted, and a public sector version is underway as we speak.
Got you. Fantastic. And so in parting, as we come to a close, so another question here, just so you know, Bill, yes, so all recordings will be made available, and for any slides where speakers are happy for it to be made public, we will also be sharing you the ability to download those as well. So in closing, I suppose I always like to ask, it's an area, and you've spoken about, well, you need to find the stakeholders and who's going to champion, et cetera, et cetera. But for those who are still just trying to figure out, okay, where do I start? Well, what is the starting point? And we know that most people are kind of already halfway, if not, further down this journey. But for those who are still contemplating that kind of what is your first rule, your first piece of advice and guidance you give to anyone?
Particularly, Jason, I'll answer that in the context of assuming one has not, one works for a company where that has not yet been undertaken at all, and one wants to be viewed as the leader in this large and burgeoning effort that's taking place around the world. And that is, find out the specific number of occupations that exist in your company. And to determine that, you'll go to HR and you'll find out the degree to which they align with the occupations as defined by, in our case, the US Bureau of Labor. Do they align with those occupational titles? First and foremost, get the number of occupations in your business, at which point you'll then go on to do that categorization, the 10 steps that I talked about. But first things first, get that number. And then secondly, get the numbers from the general ledger. Do not rely upon well, I think it's this. No. Find out the top 10 revenue, the top 10 business expense categories at their lowest common denominator, and then you're on your way.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. What a great way to end the opening session of this content week. So I would ask the audience to join me in a virtual round of applause. Mr. Kenneth McGee, thank you very, very much,
Thanks
sir,
so
for your
much.
time and for your insights and for sharing that research with us. So that does bring a close to the session. Obviously, for anyone interested in having a further conversation with Kenneth, feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn. He's more than happy to welcome any further questions you may have. And we always like to encourage you making those connections, obviously, after these sessions as well, because you don't have the ability to go and physically shake everybody's hands or go and thank Ken individually. So please do reach out to him. We're going to now close down the first session.